Hi, I am Lucas. I am the developer of Historia Realis Rome, and I want to talk about war in ancient Rome. There are multiple levels to war. There's the grand strategy layer, there's the campaign layer, and there's the battle layer. And in this video, I'm going to focus on the campaign layer of war, because that's what I'm working on right now. So I don't think war has been well represented in games, especially Roman and ancient war. There are a few conventions and tropes that have been kind of set in stone, and I don't think they're really accurate about how things were. One of those is that the importance of troops and troops composition, and I'm not saying that that was completely unimportant, but it's just one aspect. And when you play these games, it seems to be like everything. So yes, troop types mattered, how many you have of each type of cavalry, of infantry, but the commander did not have much influence over that. You know, it's not like you could recruit archers, recruit cavalry, and just come up with these horses out of nowhere. It's like you get the horses you're given pretty much, and you have to work with that. Another aspect is that in games, you lead alone and you make all of the decisions as the commander, and you have all of this clear information about your army, and you have a lot of information about the enemy army. And that wasn't quite the case. The Roman commander was the ultimate leader, but there was this council around him also making a lot of decisions and being delegated part of the job. And information was not clear, even about one's own army, much less about the enemy. And that's why scouting and gathering information was so important. And supply was crucial. And I think what we would usually see in games is either supply is non-existent or it's too granular and it's too finicky. And I find that movement and territorial control and positioning is over important in games. So games are usually about moving troops, either on the map, specifically in a battle map, moving troops to this side, or about moving them along provinces or, this larger units of territory. And to the Romans, this kind of movement, either, in the battle or in provinces, it wasn't that meaningful. So what were the core elements of war in ancient Rome, in my view? First of all, information and deception, which was used for decision-making and outwitting the enemy. And this includes scouting, trying to misinform the enemy, prevent them from gaining information on you, discovering the enemy's plan, being discovered and having to change your plan, all of this stuff. And also the internal information, knowing your own troops, knowing their state, how they're viewing the situation, what's the real morale of your army, everything that's going on within your own troops. Second of all, supply. Supply was just absolutely important, but it was also mostly a limiter of what you could do, because you needed the supply in order for the army not to starve completely. And that meant you had to march through certain paths, you had to go near water, you had to make sure that your supplies from your base would reach you wherever you went, or that wherever you went you could get local supplies. And the season mattered a lot. So in winter you did not want to be campaigning at all if you could, and it really mattered how deep into enemy territory you were, more than where you were in terms of being around the map. That wasn't as important as how deep into the enemy territory you were, because if you are very deep into enemy territory, your supply lines are not going to be able to extend all that way, very likely. The third main element were the men. And yes, here there's the aspect of numbers, composition, recruiting, training, their morale, their discipline, their equipment. So there is that. But there's also the personnel management. There's the hierarchy of commanders, who are your legates, who are helping them, who's your staff, and all of the interactions within the staff. Are people getting along? Are they fighting? Is there infighting within the commander staff? Is there, conflict? So those were the three core elements of war in ancient Rome, in my view. 1, information. 2, supply. And 3, the men. Some other random facts about campaign that I think are useful to see. First is that the battles were rare. Usually you'd spend 99.9% of a campaign marching, besieging if you're besieging. So just sitting outside a settlement. You'd spend time foraging for resources. But a campaign was mostly very, very boring. You just go from place to place or stay in camp, stay in one place for a long time, and you would see battle maybe once, maybe twice. Maybe there would be some skirmishing near the battle as the armies were close to each other. You'd get some skirmishing, but 99.9% of a campaign was very, very boring in some sense. I think it's actually quite interesting, the things that they did when not in battle, but battle was rare. The routes of marching were usually fixed, so Roman armies, due to the need of supplies, they kind of had to follow the routes that allowed supplies to reach them or allowed them to gather supplies and get water. So most armies would go from city to city, following the same routes, which is along the rivers, and there wasn't much deviation in those routes. So all of the liberty of movement that games usually portray, Roman generals did not really have much of that. Roman generals would usually follow the same routes that previous generals had followed in previous campaigns, if there were any. So the routes were fixed. Sieges rarely ended in assaults. So I know it's cool to see this big battle for a city, but that was usually not the case. So either there was a quick surrender at the prospect of a siege. So the Roman army would come in, the city would look and say, yeah, we don't really want to be facing a siege. We don't want to spend maybe a year being besieged and starving. So we'll just give up. They'll just surrender quickly. Or if there was some hope that there would be a relief, there would be an army coming in to save the city, then they would not surrender. They would endure the siege for as long as they had to. And these long sieges did not culminate in a battle. They culminated in a surrender if they lasted long enough. Or the siege could just be lifted and no battle, The army besieges for many months and then realizes, oh, we can't continue the siege. We don't have enough supplies. They have outlasted us. So we're just lifting the siege and going away. But the sieges rarely ended in assaults. Mass violence and cruelty were both a solution and a problem. So the Romans won the wars not by conquering territory, because that wasn't really a thing. That's not how the Roman system worked. Sure, they besieged cities, sometimes they took cities, but taking a city was not about territorial control. The army had to move on. There was no occupation of a city. There was a deal, and then that city was now an ally, or they would support the war effort. So the war was not won through territorial control. It was won by making the enemy lose the will to fight. And what that meant a lot of the time, was committing enough atrocities, as terrible as that is, but war is terrible, and it was terrible. The Romans would commit enough atrocities that the enemy would be like, okay, we've had enough. We're going to surrender because we can't take it anymore. This war has been too terrible. And the Romans, I guess, knew this at some level. They would intentionally cause the enemy to lose the will to fight by being very violent, being cruel. But of course, this also generated a problem because nobody likes being treated that way. And this would create a lot of resentment, and it could cause revolts. It could cause peoples to unite against the Romans. And in this sense, mass violence was a solution to getting a war won, but it was also a problem because it would cause hatred towards the Romans. The Consilium, which was the General's Council, was both important and constant, and I cannot emphasize this enough. The general had this constant stream of advice by his council. So the general was not making decisions alone. There was a dispute between groups in the council, between people. People had different opinions. The general had the final say on what to do, but he was always informed, and there was this cooperative nature to Roman decision-making during a campaign through the Consilium. I want to mention a few books that I think are good. So pretty much all the books by Adrian Goldsworthy are really good. So they're the gold standard, Goldsworthy. He has a lot of books on war, on biographies of generals. A few more specific ones. I really like Hunger and the Sword by Paul Werdkamp, and this is on supply, and it's great analysis on supply. It is very, very dry though, so don't expect a riveting story about supply in the Roman army. It's very, very boring in some sense, but I find it super, super interesting. Military Consilium in Ancient Rome by Pamela Delia Johnston. So this is a book only on the Consilium. Very, very focused book. She really did a great analysis on how the Consilium worked from what we could gather, because unfortunately we don't have all that much information on it, but it's a great book. There's Spare No One, Mass Violence in Roman Warfare by Gabriel Baker, and this is where he talks about the role of violence, which is very crucial. And another one I want to highlight is Rome's Great Eastern War by Gareth C. Sampson. And this is specifically about the Mithridatic Wars and the role of Lucullus and Pompey. It's a very detailed, very good analysis of that war. Of course, there's primary sources too, so Caesar with his Gallic Wars and the Civil War. There's Vegetius with Epitomarei Militaris, which is a military manual. And it is a later source, so of course it's not as close to the Republic as we would like, but unfortunately we lost the military manuals of the Republic, so all we get are the sources that talk about them. There's Frontinus with Strategemata, there's Aelian with Tactica, Onasander, Strategicus, and there's one book called Greek and Roman Military Writers, Selected Readings by Brian Campbell, which brings all of these guys and a few more, and he separates into these categories, and he kind of like gets the best quotes, the highlights of all the military manuals. He does very little analysis, he just brings the primary sources. It's a collection of primary sources and quotes. It's very useful as well. So of course there's a lot more to Roman war, there's a lot more even to the campaign level. If you think I'm missing anything important, please do let me know in the comments or in our Discord. If I'm leaving out anything that you think I should be considering, do let me know. For links, visit his.games. This is a new website because if I tell you, oh, you can wishlist Historia Realis on Steam, so how do you say Historia Realis? So you can just go to hist.games, and that will take you to the game on Steam. I'm trying to make more content. We'll see if that works, to let you know about what I've been doing. And I'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.